Hello class, today we'll be learning about energy flow through an ecosystem, food webs, and food chains. This presentation was made for a grade 7 science class. The strategies that I have incorporated into this presentation to better include ESL and ELL learners are graphic organizers, visuals, and technological literacy. First, before we start our lesson, let's fill in our KWL worksheets. First, we know what an ecosystem is, what abiotic and biotic characteristics are, and the process of photosynthesis. Then we are going to learn about how energy flows through an ecosystem and what food webs and food chains are. So what are food chains and food webs? Just like ecologists, we are going to break down concepts into smaller ideas to fully understand food chains and food webs. First off, how does a tree get energy and nutrients? All energy comes from the sun. Therefore, the sun is the main energy source in an ecosystem, and it provides energy to plants and animals. A plant will receive energy from the sun, which will allow it to make its own food through the process of photosynthesis, which is why we call plants producers or an autotroph, which means that it makes its own food. Plants are. Next is a primary consumer, which is an organism that eats plants. A deer here is a good example of a primary consumer, which is also known as a herbivore, since it only eats plants. Next is a secondary consumer. This is an example of a wolf. A wolf is a carnivore, which means that these organisms only feed on meat. Next is a tertiary consumer. These are organisms at the top of the food chain and eat meat or plants. A good example of this is a bear, which eats meat such as wolf or deer, but also eats berries from plants. These organisms are called carnivores, which eat only meat, or omnivores, which eat both meat and plants. So what happens when animals and plants die and they start to decompose? And how does this happen? Decomposers. Examples of these organisms are fungi and some insects. These organisms eat away and break down organic matter so that these nutrients can be put back in the soil and recycled through the environment again. All these different organisms that we talked about are connected to each other through a food chain. A food chain is a linear system that links organisms according to what it eats. Organisms are placed in this chain based off what they eat and what eats them. In a food chain, organisms are part of different trophic levels. This is a fancy term for the position of an organism in a food chain. The lowest trophic level is producers, and then it increases to a primary consumer, secondary consumer, and tertiary consumer. Now we see how food chains work, but what happens if we introduce a bear into the food chain that eats a wolf or a deer or a fish? And what if we add a bird that eats a seed from a tree, or bugs that also eat things from the tree? When there are more interconnections between organisms in a food chain, we call this a food web. Now we have learnt both about food webs and food chains. Let's compare and contrast. Food chains only have one pathway, and each level in a food chain progresses to a higher trophic level in a linear fashion. Both food chains and food webs start with the same energy source, and food webs have several food chains within one diagram and have more species involved. Energy efficiency has a huge impact on the creation of food webs and food chains. The sun transfers approximately 100% of its energy to producers, but because nothing is ever 100% efficient, producers only transfer 10% of its energy absorbed from the sun to primary consumers. Because of this, only a certain amount of species can survive at each trophic level. An energy efficiency pyramid can help illustrate the amount of energy available in each trophic level. Scientists use the 10% rule, which allows them to explain how the amount of energy decreases as it is transferred from each trophic level. Because of this, less organisms can survive at higher trophic levels. The effects of an energy efficiency pyramid can be seen in the environment. Say that you're walking the mountains with your dog. What types of organisms do you see a lot of? You see a lot of plants and trees. Primary consumers need a lot of plants to eat to gain energy to survive. This explains how energy can affect population dynamics and biomass in an ecosystem. Why is knowledge about energy and the ecosystem important to us as humans? Well, humans actually have a huge impact on the environment and may affect the interactions between organisms in a food web and a food chain. And that concludes our lesson. So thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, you can feel free to contact me. Here are the summary of the terms that I went over in this presentation.